These vault bearings take Dexter specific grease for these vault hubs. At room temperature, it's tacky, but when it gets warm, it turns into a liquid and it provides a better lubrication for the bearings. Okay, so these vault hubs made by Dexter, there's a lot of hype about them on the web, but really they're almost identical to a regular plain Jane hub. There's a seal that's the same and it looks like a regular single lip seal. So that goes towards basically the center of the trailer axle. There'd be a bearing on the inside right here. That's all standard. They do ask you to use some RTV sealant around that seal before you drive it in, so we will do that. That's not typical. Usually trailer bearings, they don't make you do that. There is an O-ring that we've got removed. We got the old one out. We're going to put a new one in. There's this O-ring groove right where my fingernail is. That is not typical, so that would be special to these vault hubs. And then you have this right here, which is a spring-loaded cap, and the shiny part of this cap right here interfaces with that O-ring, and so it's a better seal than regular bearing caps would be. When we took this black plastic plunger out, there were 2 O-rings. This is probably a pretty good seal, the black plastic center to the chrome outside, and then the chrome outside connects to this O-ring. So I'd say the whole front of it is sealed. This inner race right here appears to have a hole right there where grease will protrude through. So it goes through the spindle and comes out a hole. And I also think that there is likely an O-ring underneath this inner bearing race, which we didn't change, so I can't replace that. So we're gonna throw in our inside bearing right here, and we've got that packed up with a little bit of grease. And then we're going to wipe this down and use some RTV sealant on our seal. All right, so just a skim of RTV. You only want to get the sealant on the side of the seal. You don't want it to get any underneath the seal, and you'll see what we mean in a minute. Basically, I think any more than a stain is more than you need. You don't really want any grease residue on this surface. You want the RTV to adhere to it nicely. So just center it and then tap it in with a piece of wood. You want to drive that in straight. So it's going in nice and straight now, but it's still got to go in some. Okay. So, little tip for you folks on the web: if your spindle has grooves cut in it from the original seal, which our spindle has, you can see them, but you really can't feel them too much. You don't have to drive that seal in all the way, or you can drive it in further than flush, and that will put the new seal riding on a different part of your spindle. You can take a rag and wipe the RTV off of there. Really, the only place it's important to wipe it off is on this black rubber piece. And this is the part where you're gonna kick yourself if you forgot to put the bearing in first. You gotta ruin the seal to get it out again. So we're gonna install the new O-ring in the hub, in that groove right there where my fingernail is. And before we do that, we've lubed up the O-ring. Don't cut it with your fingernail. Okay, so we're getting ready to put the hub back on the spindle. We put a little grease on the inner bearing, inner race, and a little grease on the inner seal right there, just so that it's not running dry. And we'll flip that 180 degrees and throw it on the spindle. Dun, dun, da, dun, da, da. And then next, the inner bearing goes in place. It will pump itself. Gotta go in further than that. And then you've got a washer. Notice there's a flat spot on the washer. It only goes on the spindle one way. Yeah, exactly. While you're tightening that nut, it does help to give the bearing a little spin, or the hub a little spin. So I'd take those needle nose pliers and give that an extra tight turn to just seat everything, and then seat that. And while I'm rotating it, can you get any more of a turn or no? You don't need to put 50 foot-pounds, just as much as you can do with them. Okay. And now I would back it off just the smallest amount. Yeah, right, just to break the, right there. And then this castle nut looks like it would lock it in place right there. And if you can't get the pin to line up, you can rotate this nut and it'll put that tab in a different position. Throw the cotter pin down. So maybe you take it for a little test ride. If the bearing runs too hot, let it cool down overnight, then adjust it. Okay. You don't want to really feel any resistance to the rolling. Like, you don't want any binding at all. Pull it down before you bend it up. There you go. The cotter pin is nicely bent around, so it's not going to interfere with the cap when the cap is spinning and the cotter pin is not spinning. There's extra friction because that bearing's no longer dry, right? It's got some grease in it. So we're pumping that until we see the grease emerge around the washer, so a little ways to go. Oh, okay, one more. Look at that, there it goes. Okay, so we took apart the pressurized grease cap. I'll show you how it goes together. You've got this outer cylinder. You've got this ring, which goes with the lip facing up. So that goes in there, like that. Then the spring goes in, and then this plunger goes in, and you notice there are two O-rings there. If your O-rings are worn, you can replace them. Okay, so I've got some bearing grease. This is not the proper vault hub grease, but it doesn't matter. We're just trying to get these O-rings lubed up so that they don't get cut when we shove them in. So I'll give that a little spin, and there's the first O-ring, there's a second O-ring. Oh yeah, nice and smooth with the spring action. And I'll put the lock ring in, put my thumb inside, and I'll push it down and get one tab of the lock ring in place like that. And then I'll push the other tab of the lock ring in. I think I will. And like any lock ring, once you get it in place, you want to spin it in the groove to make sure it's actually seated. Now we're pumping up the cap. And we've got this interface cleaned right in there so that the Loctite will adhere to it. So we get a little smear of blue Loctite around the perimeter. If you have enough grease in the cap, it's going to cause this spring-loaded cap to push out. And when that happens, you know you have enough grease in there. And over time, as grease gets consumed and leaks past the seal, this plastic cap will move inward to keep grease in the whole system. Nope. So yeah, the knob protruded a little bit, and that's probably all you can hope for. So that concludes the vault hub bearing maintenance. Not that big of a deal. Wanted to show you, and hopefully this helps somebody out on how to put these back together. Good luck with your do-it-yourself project.